Well, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter Are Doing a Podcast with Deborah Alcott-Tyler, the Chief Executive of the Directory of Social Change, and me, Peter Wanless, the Chair of Five Rights Foundation, and the President of Somerset Cricket Club, and one or two other bits and pieces. And we're back after almost a month off the airwaves. So,
and I've missed you, Peter. I'm so used to us getting together weekly and, you know, having a ding dong or thoroughly aggressively agreeing with each other. You know, it's just felt really odd not seeing you for the best part of a month. So Happy New Year to you too, and to listeners.
Yes, Happy New Year to you. They did this thing on LinkedIn, didn't they, where they told you who you'd engaged with most, I think, over the 12-month period. And not surprisingly, I'd engaged most with you.
Yeah, me too.
But that wouldn't have been true any previous year in the entirety of our professional careers. So it is strange, isn't it, how we would talk to each other probably twice a year up until a year ago, and now we can't shut up.
Yeah, and not only that, it's not enough meeting weekly. We're now sharing things on LinkedIn, WhatsApp messaging. It's hilarious, but lovely. It's a really lovely thing, I think.
So how did you manage over Christmas? How was Christmas for you?
Well,
it was a break.
Well, it was a bit of an endurance test, really. I mean, DSE was off for 2 weeks, basically, more or less, give or take a couple of days. But Andy and I, my partner, got flu, and so and he, like normally when he's not well, he won't stay in bed. He just likes to mope about the house and make it very clear to me that he's not feeling well, bless him. But this time he actually went to bed for 3 days. He didn't really emerge for 3 days, so he was really seriously ill. And I wasn't as ill as him because I'd had my flu jab. So that meant it, managed some of the symptoms because, of course, we're entitled to that now, Peter. Now we're over 60. But it's just, I mean, you probably can't hear it in my voice. I hope not, but it's still hanging around. It's like taking weeks to shake off this bloody thing. So it was enjoyable in the sense family, etc., but a bit of an endurance test because we had to host and, go places and have people over. And though we thoroughly enjoyed that, it's quite challenging doing it when you're feeling pretty ropey, I think. But, but back now, full of energy and enthusiasm for the year ahead and full of hope.
Oh, that's good. Ahead. Well, that's good. Well, I had 2 weeks of lots and lots of homemade cocktails from the party barn, and my Christmas present was a dartboard and darts for the party barn. So as well as watching the darts championship, we've been playing darts, but it's freezing cold out there. We haven't got there's a fire and everything in the barn, but we haven't got round to lighting it. So we've been playing darts in great big coats, drinking cocktails to warm ourselves up, and a few of the darts have hit the board in those circumstances, but not as many as might otherwise be the case. I don't think that Luke Littler is going to be threatened by the quality of our ability to play round the clock.
Although, darts. To be fair, if you're all bundled up in big, thick, heavy coats, you're probably more reflective of the modern darts player because they're not renowned for their slenderness, are they? Bless them.
No, it's a different sort of skill, isn't it? It's a precision, and I mean, incredibly, there were one of the semi-finalists. He had a degenerative eye condition, and there's been quite a lot of coverage around his skill and ability to play darts, despite sight being so, and precision of throwing the dart. So it's not an athletic sport in that sense, but it demands extraordinary levels of skill and ability under pressure, and all sorts of, anyway, so I enjoyed that, and this is the first year that it's come back, and it doesn't feel like coming back really for me at all. 1 week is pretty much like another week. I mean, yes, I've drunk a lot more cocktails than I normally would in a typical 7-day period, but that sense of I went down to the cricket club this morning and for a meeting, and they were closed for 2 weeks, and the players are now out. There's a great piece of video of them running over the hilltops, and some of them plunging into the freezing cold sea and this sort of stuff. But everyone in the office is back to work and gearing up again now. And you could that sort of Well, I'm glad you're feeling hopeful, because it can be quite a sort of strain getting yourself back into things, can't you? And getting a sense of perspective and importance when
It's
everything
very
feels
true.
such a challenge. And
Yeah.
I'm not sensed. For me, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like more of the same, and
Yeah.
I feel fortunate in that respect.
Well, one of our staff very wittily remarked yesterday when we did our all staff meet. You know, we get together every morning at 9:30. I can't remember the exact words. I think it was Kathy said something like, "I've got to try and remind my brain how to do work." You know, it's like because you've got to get back into a different pattern and different, you know, responding to emails and organising stuff, things like that. But it happens really quickly, you know, doesn't it? It's like very fast. You've like Christmas already feels like years away. You know what I mean?
And have you sent a uplifting CEO welcome to 2026 message?
Yeah, well, I did. So Gabby, our marketing person, said, "Deborah, will you write something for the DSC New Year?" So I did, and I think it went up yesterday or the day before, which was basically more the same. I mean, you and I have spoken about this on the podcast before, but it was such a difficult year last year for so many people. But actually, it wasn't difficult for everybody, and not everybody is like on the edge of burnout. And also for those of us who did face massive, severe crises in our organisation, which we certainly did at DSC, and I know lots of colleagues in the sector did. Most of us are still here. We managed to overcome them, and, you know. And for me, at the moment, that is huge success. I mean, I'm always saying to people to stop worrying about this growth that you're aiming for. Actually, at the moment, survival is a pretty bloody good sign that you're a good organisation and you're working well. When you consider all the extra costs that's been shoved at us with ENICs, you know, that fundraising is down, that local authority income is down. You know, it's amazing that we're still operating and still here. So it's that message really I was giving. It's like, you know, not to get into a doom loop, but just to enter the year with hope. But making the point that hope isn't enough.
No.
You know, you need to combine it with action. And that, so you're hoping for the best, but doing those things that will deliver the best at the same time. So that's basically my view about this year. We will see. Although, to be honest, it might all be completely academic, because it looks as if we're on the verge of Europe going to war with America. You know what I mean? So it's so these massive like world political crises, it's really hard to think that you know, getting the board papers ready for the end of January meeting, just you sort of think if we even get there.
yes. Well, as we keep saying, concentrate on the mission and the purpose. And
exactly.
So many of us are so fortunate to be engaged and involved with issues which are so vitally important. And I know it feels like a pressure as a leader that you're on display all the time, but actually, there's no more important time of the year to seek to show energy and hope to help people over that little hump, because as you say, once you get back into it, the work is so important. So many people depend on our charities and our causes and what we can do for them. So to moaning about it is rather counterproductive, without being naive. I
mean, it's tough for people, but it's just remembering that there were successes last year. You know, even those charities that really struggled will have had real successes. And as you say, Peter, we're helping to make a massive difference. And there's a very good chance that we profoundly affected the life of somebody without even really knowing about it directly, simply because we were there and aware and supportive and stuff like that. So it's hanging on to, you know, we've been around for thousands of years, charities, not necessarily in this legal form, but because human beings have an innate desire to help each other. And, you know, and that's good.
It is. So moving on to topical issues of charity governance and leadership. Just before Christmas, everything exploded at Oxfam, didn't it? And it was a kind of classic national newspaper story of CEO and board apparently falling out with one another, first in the newspapers and then with one another. And I don't know, and the dust has settled a little bit. It's difficult to comment specifically, but I wondered if you had any thoughts or reflections, either generally or specifically, about this issue, which seems to happen, you know, time and again when a chief executive and a chair clash with one another. I was going to say there is only ever one winner. Actually, there probably aren't ever any winners from these situations. But should they have seen it coming? Could they have handled it better? Any lessons for anyone at the moment who's feeling in a sort of tense situation, either as a chair or as a chief executive, and thinking there, but for the grace of God,
I mean, it's a really good topic, I think, to start the year on, isn't it? And obviously, I know as much about the Oxfam situation as anybody else does, having read the various articles and news, and a little bit of WhatsApp gossip and stuff. What I would say, though, is looking from the outside in, is that any situation that ends like this, the accountability has to lie squarely with the governance. So regardless of whether or not, whatever the merits, the rights and wrongs are of, the performance of the chief executive, for it to have become so ugly, so publicly, so quickly, to me says that the governance wasn't very strong. That, the ways in which the board responded to the situation clearly made it worse, not better. So even if they had come to a parting of the ways, a good board will negotiate and navigate with the human being that is the chief executive in a way that they don't leave publicly humiliated and so on. Now, my sense is, I might be wrong about this, my sense is in this particular case, it went public as somebody leaked the internal report to the chief executive, and that's why it did all go public. But even still, I would, without blaming the trustees, because it's a complex business being in governance, and they may have been well-intentioned and may well have acted in good faith, but they have to own this. This cock-up is about the failure somewhere or other in governance and in the relationships between the board and the chief executive. And so I would say that, that's not to say that sometimes, chairs have really difficult chief executives. Clearly, I'm probably a difficult chief executive myself for my chair. And also that, although more often I think that chief executives have more problematic chairs for various different reasons, but to be unable to part with grace and goodwill on both sides, I have to say is a failure on behalf of the board.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think so I'm only going off what I've read in the newspapers as well. But in one of the features I read, quite a bit of this was triggered as a consequence of the chief executive putting in a formal grievance against the chair with multiple grievances attached, and you almost feel like if you've got to that stage, you are relying on incredibly robust governance procedures to manage a situation like that rationally and privately, but also there's a kind of culture. Why once it's got to that point, is there an inevitability? And I don't forgive for a minute that whole kind of media piece, the fact that it appeared in the media before it helped, that is clearly wrong. But can and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but
it's all avoidable, Peter.
Yeah.
I don't know how the internal governance at Oxfam work, so I cannot comment about Oxfam, but I can comment about the hundreds of boards that I've engaged with, worked with over the years. And one of the problems is where you still have a board that believes that the chair is the boss of the chief executive and that they're the boss of the board, rather than recognising that the chief executive reports to the whole board, and the chair's role is to facilitate that relationship as effectively as possible. Because the chief exec doesn't want to be having to have one-to-ones every single month with every member of the board, but nonetheless, the board is the accountable body, not the chair, unless governing documents say otherwise, but they very rarely do. The second mistake that's made, and this is all avoidable, is trustees thinking that they have to be loyal to other trustees, and they don't. Your job as a trustee is solely about the charity. That is your entire focus. You need to be loyal to the charity, not to the chief executive and not to your fellow trustees, and definitely not loyal to the chair, because loyalty within a board to trustees, to each other and to the chair is often where everything goes horribly wrong, because people don't come back to what's the purpose. Our purpose here is to serve this charity to make sure it delivers its charitable objects. So I would say that those are the two key messages, which is the chair is not the boss. And if you have that sort of relationship, it's very often going to get sticky. They're the facilitator. And the second thing is about boards understanding, or trustees individually understanding where their duties lie, which is with the charity and not with the rest of the board.
Well,
and then with chief execs, I would say, one of the best pieces of advice I can give is have one-to-ones with every single one of your trustees at least once a year, just you. Even if it's half an hour virtually, or you meet up for coffee or somewhere, because that then gives you an opportunity to understand what individual trustees are thinking and concerned and are worried about. That gives them an opportunity to experience you out with a meeting or via whatever the feedback is from the chair. So remember, chief execs, you report to the whole board and create the space to meet the whole board. So I do with my board, and my chair also has a one-to-one with every single trustee on the board once a year to sort of just keep things in check. So I think chief execs can do a lot to help yourselves if you make sure that your sole route to the wider board is through the chair. That's dangerous, and it's dangerous for the individuals, but it's also really dangerous for the charity.
What would your advice be to a chief executive who feels like they've got a grievance against their chair then? Because that is there are all sorts of grievances being taken out all the time at all sorts of levels of all kinds of organizations, and it's a process which has a kind of regularity in life of its own, but there's something particularly dangerous or difficult, I think, when you get to the moment where you're feeling like that. Is it possible for a charity to function effectively with that level of apparent disagreement?
No, it's not. And it doesn't, and it does go hot, and it's costly. And the thing is, staff always know, no matter how big the organisation, you can be 5,000 people. People know if there's an issue at the top between the various leaders. The problem for chief execs, of course, is that they are the vulnerable ones. It's almost never that a chair is removed. It's nearly always the chief executive that's removed. And very often, again, these have been my experiences of things that I've worked with and observed. Like, trustees don't take the right action. So the chair and another person make all the decisions about the chief executive. The issue isn't openly shared with the rest of the board. The rest of the board don't have the opportunity to input their points of view. And they also don't find more creative solutions. I mean, there's nothing at all to stop you having on your board of trustees. I mean, most boards don't even have to have a chair, actually. It doesn't necessarily even specify in your governing documents. That's how equal chairs are. But actually, it's not uncommon, or it's becoming increasingly common for chief execs to have a supporter trustee on the board. So someone who helps them with their, personal issues and personal development stuff, and then to have the sort of management chair who's about the money and the metrics and things. And so that sort of the responsibilities of the chair are spread. And at DSC, we have a really good system because we have a chair and a vice chair. And I meet with both of them regularly, separately. And they're two different people who bring different gifts. And they do you see what I mean? And so I find that personally incredibly helpful. And in fact, our vice chair leads the appraisal of our chair, because that's the other thing, Peter, is that most chairs don't have an appraisal of their performance, or at least not one. They'll say, "How am I doing?" And nobody will ever say, "Peter, you're crap."
Yes.
Why the hell did you ever, you know what I mean? Nobody will ever say that. But so to have something properly facilitated, I think, is important too.
Yeah, I think it helped me at the NSPCC, especially in the sort of latter half of my time there. My performance was managed and appraised and contributed to by the remuneration committee, which was 4 of the board.
Yeah, so brilliant.
There was that kind of personal responsibility on the chair to be accountable for my performance, but actually the way in which it was conducted was through a subgroup with a number of different perspectives being brought to bear, and I think that was helpful to them, and it was helpful to me as well.
Spread the load. I mean, too many. It's just easier, isn't it, often for trustees? I'm not saying that they're lazy necessarily, but it can be quite difficult to come in and say, "Well, I want to know, what's going on." For example, it's really good practice for the chair to send a short email to trustees after their one-to-one with the chief executive saying how it went. Peter's doing really well. He's really happy about XYZ. He's a bit concerned about legacy fundraising, which looks a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
Morale in the organisation is pretty good, but we've got this big, tribunal coming up or something. So like a really short summary, because then that way the board know that the chair is doing their job by speaking with the chief executive, and they have a sense of what the discussion is. And then they have an opportunity to engage or ask a question. So,
yes. And then the other dimension to all of this, of course, was it all took place in the wake of very significant restructuring. And we had some conversations before Christmas about toxic groups of staff and managing through and creating that sense of shared purpose between the senior leadership on the executive side and the board when it comes to the management of change, and understanding your respective responsibilities, that you're kind of in it together, which doesn't mean to say that you're always necessarily on the same side or going to have the same opinion. That's really important.
Well, I'm sure, have I said before, Peter, I can't remember about my theory about how the structural model, the way we think of it, needs to change. So we tend to think of a charity structure as a hierarchy. So there's the board of trustees at the top, then there's the chief executive, then there's directors, staff, volunteers, and at the bottom, beneficiaries. And that sort of structure is sort of quite heavy. It implies like a real weight coming from above, and also that you've got to report up, that somehow or other this group of people, their only job is, to tell you off or be told stuff. Whereas I think a more modern way of looking at charity structures is to think of it as like a pie. And each part of the pie matters, because if you don't have every bit of it working, if you've got a bit of pie missing, the whole pie isn't going to be a pie anymore. But that each slice of the pie is equally important, so that the trustees are not more or less important than the staff, are not more or less important than the volunteers or exactly whatever. And that if you visualize your structure in your organization as a pie, it actually, just that visualization helps to break down some of those hierarchical barriers, because it's easier to think of yourselves as part of the whole. So the whole is the charity and we're just this bit of it, and we all have to work together to deliver. So I think sometimes like visualizing the structure differently rather than the traditional organizational chart structure, I think that helps too. And I think you're so right about it, Peter. And I think, you're very skilled and are very skilled and very experienced. And so I always got the sense that you'd achieved this with your board. But it's about thinking about, although of course the chief exec and the executive team are the employees of the charity, and technically the trustees are the employer, nonetheless, if you can consider yourselves as partners working alongside each other for children, or for young people, or for people with cancer, or for female prisoners, or whatever, if you can think of yourselves, our job is to work together. And so you're not looking at each other, you're not staring at each other across a table. You're both side by side staring at the issue.
Problem solving with one another, but from your distinct role positions, but looking to achieve the same together.
So looking in the same, if you can, rather than be staring at each other, you're looking at
like the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
Exactly. And also not, trustees not thinking themselves as, because lots of trustees think the challenge is about acting as a judge, a jury, and inquisitor, and sometimes the executioner. And that's also really unhelpful. It is the job of trustees to ask questions, but it's not to ask questions to catch people out. It's to ask questions to help them to understand and to move things forward, So
that's really good advice.
And we don't really teach boards' behaviours, particularly, I don't know what happens on corporate boards particularly, but certainly on charity boards, they often don't know each other terribly well. They see each other 4 times a year at a board meeting. Now, when so many are virtual, they don't even see each other in person. So they don't even have time for, chat when they're walking from the car park to the meeting room or whatever. And so I think that there's also, the other thing that chairs and chief executives can do is actually facilitate conversations with the board about behaviour. It's all these things about, if we have an issue, what's the best way of raising the issue? If we have a disagreement. In fact, I wrote an article for Civil Society Media for the Governance magazine. Listeners, if you can track it down, Civil Society Media, exactly about this, how boards could talk to each other and engage with each other when they don't always agree.
Well, maybe we could link that in the blurb, or come back to it as an issue at a future. Okay, I've got one slightly time critical one that I'd like to seek your advice on as well, which has surprised me slightly, and this is in the context of the cricket club. So I have been wanting to mobilise an interest in the wider membership at Somerset, to get many, many more people, members, supporters, to see that they could play a part in helping their club. And I'm coming at this from your classic kind of charity perspective, where, you know, we've mobilized volunteers to do all sorts of things, from painting the walls to joining task and finish groups to being focus groups of opinion to working out where our next generation of supporters are going to come from, to ultimately, though that's rather pyramid language, being a member of the board itself. So I have got through. I'm having a conversation with significant numbers of people in and around the club about, in a very kind of loose sense, about would you like to find out more? And so the president's conversation is, I hope, going to create a kind of groundswell of people with all sorts of different amounts of potential time commitment and skills, who have no idea how expert and valuable they could be to their club. So that is all good. But then I discovered that in the performance agreement definitions of what constitutes excellence for the governance boards of county cricket clubs, there's a requirement, or a kind of best practice statement, that a minimum of 25% of non-executive directors, board members, should be, quotes, independent, unquotes, from the organisation. Now, I guess this is coming from a place where you don't want a cosy collection of people who know and understand how things have always been in the past, taking big strategic decisions for the club in the future. And I'm all for independent-minded people and diverse skills and lived experiences and all the rest of it. But I kind of stopped short with that one, really, because to my mind, contextual knowledge is really, really important. You want independent people, but other things being equal, if you've got someone who's steeped in and knows and understands and appreciates the context of county cricket and is a member of Somerset, and on the other hand, you've got someone with brilliant purity of thought, but hasn't the slightest interest in cricket and lives in Newcastle or whatever, wouldn't you want to go for the person who had the contextual interest over the other? Now, I don't think that the Charity Commission has any requirements or expectations that people should be independent of their charities, do they? In fact, rather the reverse. They like to have people who've got lived experience of the cause and know and understand the organisation. So anyway, I'm going to plough on with my trying to build up this pool of people who are kind of associated with the club to a greater or lesser extent. But I'm wondering if at some point I want or need to go into battle on this idea of, you know, what do you mean by independent of.
Yeah, it's thinking about the wider context, isn't it? A lot of the reasons, because quite a lot of charities mandate a certain number of lived experience members on the board. Now, one of the reasons that they do that is because for example, if you just think about like the proportion of men and women, if you say we need more women on the board, but you don't do anything about it, what happens is you select that we find the women aren't good enough, or they're not applying, or whatever. If you say you must have 50% of your board members as women, it means you actively, proactively seek out, and then you find good women, if you see what I mean. And it's the same with lived experience, same with disabilities, whatever the thing are. Because we're so socialized into thinking, particularly at board level and things like that, that leaders are look a certain way, behave a certain way, have a certain way to speak, have a certain education, etc. It can be very difficult for us to consider people who are completely not like that as bringing value to the board. So in the context, it's probably a healthy thing.
Yeah.
I think that the real thing is a question of balance, isn't it? It's like, for example, I think about my board at DSC. So this isn't so much about independence, it's about length of service. So I have some of my trustees have been on the board for well over 10 years, if not longer. Some of them have been on the board for 2. The most important thing for me is that I have a mixture of both. I want trustees who carry the history, and I want new trustees who challenge everything, which they do. And what we do is we have a spread. And I think it's the same with lived experience. I think so. I think the way to think about it in Somerset is to think, what are you lacking? It's like, what are you looking for? What do you think you could do with more of? Independent thinking, young people, whatever it is. And then use that sort of target to work around that. But that's usually why they have mandated things like that, to help us to stretch our thinking.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I mean, I think we're looking for all those sorts of things which you have described, and my intuition is that because we've got 4,000 or 5,000 members, there will be people like that within our existing membership, never mind beyond into the wider nation, and we really ought to sort of see what we can do to give confidence and encouragement to them. But if it becomes, on the other hand, if it becomes very cozy and it's just Buddy's turn, and
so if you're looking, so if for example you're reviewing the membership and saying we want one of our members under the age of 25 to be on this board, that's fantastic, because they won't be stuck in the olden ways of doing stuff in quite the same way that someone is in their 60s or 70s. I don't know the demographics, the factual demographics of cricket members.
Well, you can hazard some pretty
skew to a certain demographic.
And certainly, we've had one season with a tier 1 professional women's team, and so we are growing fast. Our knowledge and interest and supporter base for women's cricket, which is inevitably going to be underrepresented in the
brilliant. And you're thinking of it now, getting ready for it. But there is also something super useful about having somebody on your board who perhaps doesn't care about cricket, who like, do you know what I mean? I don't mean doesn't care about cricket, but I mean who isn't like a mad fan and doesn't know about all the stats, but who can look at it from an organisational perspective and be clean about it and sort of question the traditions and the history, and we've always done it this way, from a perspective of what you're trying to achieve as a cricket club. Do you see what I mean? So I think there's always a value of having someone who's like cricket, whatever, quite enjoy sport. My questions are, you said you're going to grow your membership. How do you intend to do that? How are you going to fund this particular piece of work? You said you need a new pavilion, for 2027. What's your strategic plan to get there? Who are you seeking funding from? Because you need those people who won't get distracted by, let's just ask our famous cricketers
who should the next wicket-keeper be.
Exactly. But, it's all context, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's true. All right. Very good. That's helpful. Thank you. A little bit of free consultancy there.
That's right. I'll send you an invoice. Okay, I think we've run out of time, actually. There's loads more we could have talked about, but we've got next week. So
yeah, we'll be back again then. I hope people enjoyed that. If there are particular issues or challenges or questions you'd like us to contemplate, pontificate on, fall out about, let us know. Otherwise, see you next week.
Yes, and Happy New Year. It's going to be a good one. This is what I'm saying. I feel it in the waters. Excellent. Bye, everyone.
Bye.